He called her worthless, a failure, while secretly living off her millions. Chen thought his wife Sarah was nothing more than a struggling graphic designer, scraping together grocery money from her freelance projects. What he didn't know was that the woman washing his dishes owned a business empire worth over $3 million. And when he compared her to his mistress, calling Jessica everything Sarah wasn't, he had no idea he was about to lose the most successful woman he'd ever known. What happened next didn't just end their marriage. It shattered everything Marcus thought he understood about power, worth, and the woman he'd been betraying for over a year. Chen sat at her kitchen table at 6 in the morning, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her tired face as she reviewed her investment portfolio. The numbers were staggering. Her cryptocurrency holdings alone had grown to $1.8 million. Her real estate investments across 3 states were generating monthly income that exceeded what most people made in a year. Her digital marketing agency, operating under the business name Apex Strategies, had just secured another Fortune 500 client, pushing her annual revenue well past the $1 million mark. But Marcus would never know any of this. Not if she could help it. She closed the laptop and rubbed her eyes, listening to the sound of her husband moving around upstairs. In 20 minutes, he'd come down expecting breakfast, expecting her to play the role of the devoted wife whose biggest accomplishment was landing a logo design for the local bakery. He'd kiss her goodbye with the same condescending smile he'd worn for the past 3 years, ever since her supposed career had stagnated and his pharmaceutical sales job had made him the primary breadwinner. If only he knew that the mortgage payments he thought came from his salary were actually transferred from her business account. If only he realized that his expensive golf club membership, his new car, even the kitchen renovation he'd bragged about to his colleagues, had all been funded by the woman he'd grown to see as a financial burden. Sarah had been testing him. For 8 years of marriage, she'd been waiting for Marcus to love her for who she was, not what she could provide. She'd deliberately kept her lifestyle modest, contributing exactly what he expected from her freelance work, while quietly building an empire that could have afforded them a mansion in the hills. She'd wanted to see if the man she married would value her character, her loyalty, her love, even when he believed she had nothing else to offer. Instead, she'd watched him grow more entitled, more critical, more ashamed of her with each passing month. "Sarah," Marcus's voice boomed from upstairs. "Where's my navy suit? The one I need for the Henderson presentation?" "Dry cleaning," she called back, already moving to start his coffee. "It'll be ready by noon." She could hear his frustrated sigh through the ceiling. Everything was always her responsibility. Everything was always her fault. And lately, everything she did was compared unfavorably to Jessica Martinez, the 29-year-old marketing coordinator who had become Marcus's new standard for female achievement. Marcus appeared in the kitchen 15 minutes later, adjusting his tie with the self-important air of a man who believed his mid-level sales position made him a corporate titan. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his cologne expensive, his entire appearance crafted to project success. Success that Sarah's hidden wealth had made possible. "The Henderson account could mean a $50,000 bonus," he announced, not looking at her as she handed him his coffee. "Jessica thinks I should push for a promotion after this. She understands business strategy in a way that—" He paused, glancing at Sarah's faded jeans and oversized sweater. "In a way that's actually useful." Sarah felt the familiar sting of his casual cruelty, but her expression remained neutral. "That's wonderful, Marcus. I hope the presentation goes well." "Of course it will." He straightened his shoulders, the picture of masculine confidence. "Jessica helped me refine the pitch. She has insights into market positioning that you just can't get from doing little art projects for mom-and-pop shops." The dismissal in his voice was acid on old wounds. Sarah's little art projects included a rebranding campaign for a tech startup that had since gone public and a digital marketing strategy for a restaurant chain that had increased their revenue by 40%. But Marcus would never know that because Sarah Chen, the struggling freelance designer, would never land clients of that caliber. "Speaking of which," Marcus continued, his tone shifting to that particular brand of patronizing concern he'd perfected, "maybe you should think about getting a real job. Something with benefits." Jessica was saying that her company is always looking for entry-level administrative assistants. Sarah's hands stilled on the coffee mug she'd been washing. "Entry-level administrative assistant? Don't take it the wrong way." Marcus's voice carried that infuriating note of reasonableness that made his insults sound like helpful suggestions. It's just that freelancing clearly isn't working out for you. You're 34, Sarah. At some point, you need to acknowledge that the creative dream isn't paying the bills and find something stable, something that contributes meaningfully to our household. If he only knew that her last quarterly tax payment had been larger than his annual salary, Sarah thought. If he only understood that the household he thought he was supporting was actually being sustained by the woman he was lecturing about financial responsibility. I'll think about it, she said quietly. Good. Marcus finished his coffee and grabbed his briefcase. Jessica says entry-level positions at tech companies often lead to advancement opportunities for people who are willing to work hard. Maybe some of her motivation would rub off on you. He kissed her cheek with the absent-minded affection one might show a pet, and left for another day of representing a success that existed only in his imagination. Sarah stood in her kitchen, surrounded by appliances she'd purchased in a house she'd bought, wearing clothes that deliberately projected a poverty that didn't exist, and felt something cold and final settle in her chest. The test was over. After 8 years, she finally had her answer about who Marcus really was. And what she discovered was that the man she'd married would only love her if he could look down on her. That evening, Marcus came home 45 minutes late, his collar slightly rumpled and his explanation rehearsed. Sorry, honey. The Henderson presentation ran long, and then Jessica and I had to debrief with the team about next quarter's strategy. Sarah looked up from her laptop, where she'd been reviewing the latest reports from her property management company. 3 of her rental units had new tenants, generating an additional $4,000 in monthly income. How did the presentation go? Brilliantly. Jessica's suggestions really elevated the whole pitch. Marcus loosened his tie and moved to the refrigerator, scanning its contents with the expectation of a man who had never planned a meal in his adult life. What's for dinner? I was thinking pasta, Sarah said, closing her laptop. With that marinara sauce you like. Marcus made a face. Pasta again. Jessica was telling me about this new sushi place downtown. Their omakase menu is supposed to be incredible. Sushi sounds expensive. Not everything has to be about money, Sarah. The edge in Marcus's voice suggested this was somehow her failing. Some things are worth the investment. Jessica understands that quality experiences are part of a well-rounded lifestyle. Sarah could have pointed out that she owned shares in a restaurant group that included 4 high-end sushi establishments. She could have mentioned that she'd eaten at establishments where the omakase menu cost more than Marcus made in a week. Instead, she stood up and moved toward the kitchen. I'll make the pasta, she said. But Marcus wasn't done. There was something in his posture, a restless energy that suggested he'd been building up to this conversation all day. Actually, Sarah, we need to talk. About your situation. About where you're headed. She turned to face him, noting the way he'd positioned himself in the living room like a man preparing to deliver a boardroom presentation. My situation, your career, your contribution to this household, your future. Marcus's voice carried the authority of someone who believed his moderate success gave him the right to judge others. I've been thinking about what I said this morning, about Jessica's suggestion for the administrative position, and I realize I was being too gentle. The truth is, what you're doing isn't working. It hasn't worked for years. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, not with hurt, but with a strange anticipation. What exactly do you mean? I mean that this freelance graphic design thing has been a failure, Sarah. You make what, $2,000 a month on a good month? That's not sustainable. That's not the contribution of a partner. That's the income of a teenager with a summer job. Marcus began pacing, warming to his theme. Jessica makes $65,000 a year. She has benefits, retirement contributions, career advancement opportunities. She's building something. She's growing. She's taking responsibility for her future. And I'm not. Sarah's voice remained steady, but there was something new in her tone that Marcus was too absorbed in his own speech to notice. Honestly, no, you're not. You're coasting. You're comfortable letting me handle the real responsibilities while you play with your little design projects and pretend that's a career. Marcus stopped pacing and looked directly at her. Jessica says that in her experience, people who don't have traditional career structures often lack the discipline and motivation necessary for real success. The words hit Sarah like cold water, not because they hurt, but because they revealed so completely who Marcus had become. Or perhaps who he had always been, beneath the charm and romance of their early years. Jessica says a lot of things, doesn't she? Sarah's voice was quiet, but something in her inflection made Marcus look at her more closely. She's a smart woman, Sarah. Successful. Ambitious. She understands things about business and professional development that you just don't have experience with. Such as, Marcus straightened his shoulders, clearly pleased to be asked. Investment strategies, market analysis, networking, professional branding. She's building her personal wealth through a diversified approach that includes stock options, retirement planning, and side investments. She's not just earning money, she's multiplying it. Sarah nodded slowly. That does sound impressive. It is impressive. And the thing is, being around someone with that kind of financial sophistication makes you realize how important it is to have a partner who contributes equally to building a secure future. Marcus's voice was gaining confidence, as if he believed he was finally getting through to her. Jessica and I have been talking about what real financial partnership looks like in a marriage, and honestly, Sarah, we're not there. The admission hung in the air between them. Sarah felt a strange sense of relief, as if a puzzle she'd been trying to solve for months had suddenly clicked into place. You and Jessica have been talking about our marriage? She asked. Marcus had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but he pushed forward. We've been talking about relationships in general, about what it means to be with someone who shares your ambitions and your commitment to financial success. Jessica's last relationship ended because her boyfriend couldn't match her professional drive. She understands the importance of being with someone who's your equal. Your equal, Sarah repeated. Exactly. Someone who challenges you, who brings the same energy and success to the partnership that you do. Marcus was fully committed to this conversation now, his voice passionate with the conviction of a man who believed he was finally being honest. Sarah, I love you, but I need you to understand that what you're contributing to this marriage isn't enough. It hasn't been enough for years. Sarah walked to the kitchen counter and leaned against it, her movements deliberate and calm. Tell me more about Jessica's investment strategies. Marcus's face lit up, clearly thrilled that Sarah was finally showing interest in learning from his new standard of female achievement. Well, she's got a diversified portfolio that includes tech stocks, some cryptocurrency holdings, and she's looking into real estate investment trusts. She actually made $40,000 last year just from her side investments. $40,000, Sarah said. That's impressive, right? That's more than some people make in their primary job. She's got this whole system for researching growth opportunities and market trends. She spends her weekends reading financial publications and attending investment seminars. Marcus was pacing again, energized by his subject. She was explaining to me how most people just coast through life without any real strategy for building wealth. They think a job is enough, but successful people understand that you need multiple income streams and long-term planning. Multiple income streams, Sarah echoed. Exactly. Jessica has her salary, her investment returns, and she's even consulting on marketing projects for small businesses on the side. She's building an empire, Sarah. That's the kind of thinking that creates real financial security. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. And you think I should learn from her approach? I think you should be inspired by it. Jessica proves that it's possible to take control of your financial destiny instead of just hoping that things work out. Marcus sat down across from her, his expression sincere. Look, I know this is hard to hear, but I care about you too much to let you continue down this path. You're smart, Sarah. You're creative, but you're not applying those abilities in a way that builds real value. Jessica could probably give you some advice about how to transition into a more stable career path. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus seemed to take her silence as receptivity to his message. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful and measured. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course, if you found out that I was more financially successful than Jessica, would that change how you see me? Marcus blinked, clearly thrown by the hypothetical. What do you mean? I mean, if you discovered that I was actually earning more money and building more wealth than she is, would you suddenly find my contribution to our marriage acceptable? Marcus's laugh was uncomfortable. Sarah, that's not really a realistic scenario. Jessica makes $65,000 a year, plus her investment returns. You make maybe $24,000 on a good year. The gap is just too wide for that to be a meaningful question. But hypothetically, Sarah pressed. If you're wrong about my finances, would that change your opinion of my worth as a partner? I'm not wrong, Sarah. I know what you make. I know what your business brings in. I've seen the checks. Marcus's voice was patient but firm. This isn't about some fantasy scenario where you're secretly wealthy. This is about the reality of our situation and how we move forward. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. This man who had been sharing her bed for 8 years while fantasizing about building a life with someone else. This man who had been criticizing her contribution to a household that she'd been secretly supporting. This man who measured her value in dollars while living off her undisclosed millions. You're right, she said finally. This is about reality. And I think it's time we dealt with some realities that you're not aware of. Sarah walked to the kitchen drawer where she kept important documents. The same drawer Marcus had watched her open hundreds of times without ever questioning what she might be storing there. She pulled out a leather portfolio and set it on the counter. What's that? Marcus asked. Financial records, Sarah said simply. Marcus looked puzzled but not particularly concerned. He'd seen Sarah's financial records before. Bank statements showing modest deposits from freelance clients. A small business checking account with a balance that rarely exceeded $5,000. Tax returns that confirmed his understanding of her limited earning capacity. Sarah opened the portfolio and pulled out the first document, a statement from her cryptocurrency exchange account. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, her voice conversational, about multiple income streams and investment strategies and building real wealth, about how Jessica makes $40,000 a year from her side investments. She handed him the first page. Marcus glanced at it, then did a double take. The account balance showed $1.8 million in cryptocurrency holdings. What is this? His voice was sharp with confusion. My cryptocurrency portfolio, Sarah said matter-of-factly. I bought Bitcoin when it was under $1,000. Ethereum at $40. Some other altcoins that have performed well over the years. Marcus stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. This can't be real. It's very real. I've been holding most of these positions for over 6 years. Sarah pulled out another document. This is my stock portfolio through Charles Schwab. Tech stocks mostly. Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. Some smaller growth companies that have done very well. The account balance on this statement was $1 million. Marcus's face had gone pale. Sarah, what is this? What are you showing me? I'm showing you the reality of our financial situation. Sarah's voice remained calm, almost clinical. The reality you said I needed to face. She pulled out more documents. Real estate holdings, for rental properties worth a combined $1.2 million, generating monthly income that exceeded Marcus's salary. Business tax returns for Apex Strategies showing annual revenue of $1.8 million and net profit of $847,000. This is impossible, Marcus whispered. Is it? Sarah arranged the documents on the counter like a dealer laying out cards. You said Jessica understands building wealth through diversified income streams. Multiple investments. Long-term planning. Well, so do I. Marcus was on his feet now, moving closer to examine the papers as if proximity might reveal them to be forgeries. These dates, some of these investments are from 5 years ago. 6 years ago. How is this possible? I've been building this portfolio since before we got married, Marcus. The cryptocurrency investments started as a hobby, but they grew significantly. The real estate purchases began 3 years ago when I had enough capital to start diversifying. The business has been operating under the name Apex Strategies for 4 years. Apex Strategies. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. I've heard of Apex Strategies. They handled the digital marketing for Henderson Industries. The account I've been trying to land for 6 months. I know. I've been watching you prepare for that presentation for weeks. Sarah pulled out one more document. The signed contract between Apex Strategies and Henderson Industries, dated 3 months earlier. We landed them as a client in January. The account you're hoping to close? It's already mine. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Marcus stared at the contract, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the beginning of something that looked like panic. But this doesn't make sense, he said finally. If you have all this money, why are we living like this? Why haven't you told me? Why are you pretending to struggle with freelance work? Sarah looked at him across the counter. This man who had been her husband for 8 years and who had just spent 20 minutes explaining why she wasn't good enough for him. Because I wanted to know who you really were, she said simply. I wanted to know if you could love me when you thought I had nothing to offer but myself. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He sank back into his chair, the documents spread before him like evidence of his own blindness. All this time, he whispered, "You've had all this money, and you've been watching me." "Watching you what, Marcus?" Sarah's voice remained steady. "Watching you criticize my contribution to our household while I paid the mortgage? Watching you mock my freelance income while I funded your golf club membership? Watching you compare me unfavorably to your mistress while you lived off my wealth?" The word mistress hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. Marcus's head snapped up. "What did you say?" "I said mistress. Jessica Martinez, marketing coordinator at TechFlow Solutions. 29 years old, makes $65,000 a year plus benefits. The woman you've been having an affair with for the past 14 months. Marcus's face went white. "Sarah, I can explain. Can you?" Sarah walked around the counter to face him directly. "Can you explain why you've been staying late at the office 3 nights a week to have dinner with another woman? Can you explain the hotel charges on the credit card that you thought I didn't see? Can you explain why you've been coming home smelling like her perfume and talking about her insights and her ambitions and her superior understanding of financial success?" Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. The elaborate justifications he'd been building in his mind for months suddenly seemed pathetic and transparent. "Because here's what I can explain," Sarah continued. "I can explain why I hired a private investigator 6 months ago. I can explain how I have photographs of you and Jessica at dinner, documentation of your hotel visits, records of your text messages and phone calls. I can explain exactly how long this affair has been going on and precisely how you've been lying to me about where you were and who you were with." Marcus was breathing hard now, his face a mixture of guilt and desperation. "Sarah, listen to me. It's not what you think. Jessica and I, we're just what? Just friends? Just colleagues?" Sarah's voice remained dangerously calm. "Just 2 people who understand each other in a way that your inadequate wife never could. That's not fair, isn't it?" Sarah leaned against the counter, her posture relaxed despite the intensity in her voice. "For the past year, you've been telling me that I'm not successful enough, not ambitious enough, not financially responsible enough to be your equal. You've been holding Jessica up as the standard of what a real woman should be. Someone who builds wealth, someone who understands investment, someone who contributes meaningfully to a partnership." She gestured to the financial documents spread across the counter. "Well, Marcus, congratulations. You found her. Unfortunately for you, you were already married to her." The full impact of the situation was beginning to penetrate Marcus's consciousness. He looked from the documents to Sarah's face and back again, as if trying to reconcile the woman he'd been dismissing with the evidence of her extraordinary success. "Sarah, please. I know how this looks, but you have to understand. I understand perfectly." Sarah walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard that her money had landscaped. "I understand that you fell in love with someone you thought was more successful than your wife. I understand that you've been planning a future with a woman who makes less money than you, while criticizing me for not making enough. I understand that you've been ashamed of me at the same time that you've been living off my wealth." She turned back to him. "What I don't understand is how you could be so wrong about everything." Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the kitchen floor. "Okay, yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I was wrong about your finances. But Sarah, you hid this from me. You've been lying to me for years. How was I supposed to know?" "You weren't supposed to know, Marcus. That was the point." Sarah's voice was sad now, the calm before a storm that was building in intensity. "I wanted to know if you could value me for who I am, not what I have. I wanted to know if my husband could love me when he thought I was poor, struggling, dependent on his success." She paused, looking at him with something that might have been pity. "And now I know that you can't. That's not true." Marcus's voice was desperate now. "Sarah, I do love you. I've always loved you. This thing with Jessica, it was a mistake. A moment of weakness. If I had known about your success, about your wealth, I never would have. Wouldn't have what? Wouldn't have cheated? Wouldn't have criticized my contribution to our marriage? Wouldn't have compared me to another woman every single day for the past 6 months?" Sarah shook her head. "Marcus, do you hear yourself? You're saying that if you had known I was rich, you would have treated me better. Do you understand how that sounds?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair, his composure completely shattered. I'm saying I made a mistake. I'm saying I was wrong about Jessica, wrong about our marriage, wrong about what was important. But Sarah, we can fix this. We can work through this. Can we? Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Because I have some people who might disagree with you. She hit a number and put the phone on speaker. After 2 rings, a professional voice answered. Morrison, Patterson and Associates. This is David Morrison. David, it's Sarah Chen. Are the papers ready? Absolutely, Sarah. Everything's prepared according to your specifications. The divorce filing, the asset protection documents, the restraining order if needed. I have to say, your documentation is extraordinarily thorough. This should be a very straightforward process. Marcus went rigid. Sarah, what are you doing? I'm doing what I should have done 6 months ago when I first discovered your affair, Sarah said calmly. David, can you confirm the asset division as we discussed? Certainly. Due to the prenuptial agreement, all assets acquired before the marriage and all assets derived from those initial investments remain solely with you. The house, being purchased entirely with your funds, remains your property. Mr. Chen will need to find alternative housing arrangements within 30 days. Marcus sank back into his chair as if he'd been punched. The prenup? Sarah, we barely discussed that prenup. I trusted you. I didn't even read it carefully. You should have. David Morrison's voice came through the speaker. It's quite comprehensive. Mrs. Chen was very thorough in protecting her assets. Sarah ended the call and looked at Marcus, who appeared to be going into shock. 30 days, she said simply. That should give you enough time to figure out if Jessica's $40,000 in side investments can support both of you. Marcus stood up so suddenly that his chair toppled backward. Sarah, you can't be serious. We can work this out. I'll end things with Jessica. I'll do whatever you want. But you can't just destroy our marriage over a mistake. A mistake? Sarah's composure finally cracked, and for the first time, anger blazed in her voice. Marcus, you didn't accidentally have an affair. You didn't mistakenly spend a year telling me I wasn't good enough for you. You didn't inadvertently fall in love with another woman while criticizing your wife for not being successful enough. She stepped closer to him, and there was something in her bearing that Marcus had never seen before. Something that suggested the woman he'd been underestimating for years was capable of things he'd never imagined. You systematically destroyed my self-worth while living off my money. You built a relationship with another woman based on lies about your own success. You compared me to your mistress every single day, telling me I should learn from her superior understanding of financial responsibility. Sarah pulled out her phone again and scrolled to a text message thread. Would you like to know what Jessica thinks about superior financial responsibility? Would you like to see the text she sent you about your successful lifestyle and your impressive earning potential? Because Marcus, she's not in love with you. She's in love with the life she thinks you can provide. The life that actually comes from my bank account. Marcus's face crumbled as the full implications of his situation began to sink in. Sarah, please. I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong. But we have 8 years together. 8 years of marriage, of building a life. You can't just throw that away. I'm not throwing anything away, Marcus. You threw it away when you decided that I wasn't enough for you. Sarah's voice was steady again, but underneath the calm was something harder than diamond. You threw it away when you chose to build a future with someone else while criticizing me for not contributing to ours. She walked to the counter and began gathering up the financial documents, her movements precise and businesslike. But here's the thing you need to understand about those 8 years, Marcus. I wasn't just building a marriage. I was building an empire. And while you were falling in love with a marketing coordinator who makes $65,000 a year, you were living with a woman who built a multi-million-dollar business. Sarah closed the portfolio and looked at him directly. Jessica thinks she's stealing a successful man from a failure of a wife. What she's actually done is stolen a man who's about to lose everything because he was too blind to recognize success when he was sleeping next to it every night. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stood in the middle of his kitchen, Sarah's kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of a wealth he'd never suspected and a marriage he'd destroyed through his own arrogance and infidelity. What happens now? He whispered. Sarah walked to the door, portfolio in hand. Now you call Jessica and tell her the truth. You tell her that the successful lifestyle she's been admiring was built by your wife's money. You tell her that the ambitious, financially responsible man she fell in love with is about to be living on a pharmaceutical sales salary with no house, no investments, and no wealthy spouse to subsidize his golf club membership. She paused at the doorway. And Marcus? You tell her that her $40,000 in side investments is going to have to support both of you now, because the woman you called worthless is worth more than both of you combined. Sarah walked out of the kitchen, leaving Marcus alone with the magnitude of what he'd lost and the devastating realization that his entire understanding of his marriage had been built on lies he'd told himself about his own importance. In the days that followed, the unraveling of Marcus Chen's carefully constructed delusions happened with ruthless efficiency. Sarah moved through the divorce proceedings with the same quiet competence she'd applied to building her business empire, while Marcus discovered what his life looked like when it wasn't secretly subsidized by his wife's millions. The first shock came when he tried to make the mortgage payment and discovered that his bank account, which he'd thought contained their household savings, actually held only his personal checking and the small joint account they'd used for groceries and utilities. The mortgage payment of $4,000 a month had been automatically deducted from an account he'd never seen, an account that bore only Sarah's name. The second shock came when his landlord, because that's what Sarah had become overnight, served him with an eviction notice. The house he'd thought of as theirs was entirely in her name, purchased with her money, and he had no legal right to remain there. The third shock came when he tried to explain the situation to Jessica. They met at the sushi restaurant Marcus had mentioned, the one with the expensive omakase menu that he could no longer afford. Jessica arrived looking radiant, clearly expecting a romantic evening with the man she'd been planning a future with. She wore a new dress, had her hair styled, and carried herself with the confidence of a woman who believed she'd won a prize worth winning. "You sounded strange on the phone," she said as they settled into their booth. "Is everything okay with the Henderson presentation? Did you get the promotion?" Marcus looked across the table at this woman he'd thought he loved, this woman he'd held up as the standard his wife could never meet, and felt something like nausea. "Jessica, we need to talk. About us, about our future, about things I should have told you a long time ago." Jessica's smile faltered slightly, but she reached across the table to touch his hand. "Marcus, you're scaring me. What's wrong?" "My wife knows about us." The words fell between them like stones into still water. Jessica went very still, her hand withdrawing from his. "Knows what exactly?" "Everything. The dinners, the hotels, the plans we've been making. She's known for months. She hired a private investigator." Marcus's voice was flat, drained of the confidence that had characterized his interactions with Jessica for over a year. "She's filing for divorce." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "Okay, that's difficult, but we knew this was a possibility. We knew that eventually you'd need to end your marriage to be with me." She leaned forward slightly. "I'm not going anywhere, Marcus. We'll get through this together." Marcus looked at her earnest face, her determination to stand by him, and felt the full weight of what he had to tell her next. "Jessica, there's more. About my financial situation. About the life I've been showing you." "What do you mean?" Marcus took a breath that felt like swallowing broken glass. "The house we've talked about you moving into? It's not mine. It was never mine. Sarah bought it with her own money, and her name is the only one on the deed." Jessica's brow furrowed. "I don't understand. You said you both contributed to the down payment." "I thought we did. But it turns out Sarah paid for everything. The down payment, the mortgage payments, all of it." Marcus's voice was growing weaker with each admission. "I never saw the actual financial records. I just assumed that my contributions were part of the household account." "Okay," Jessica said slowly. "So the house is more complicated than we thought. We'll figure something else out. Maybe we'll get a place together. Between your salary and mine, we can afford something nice." Marcus shook his head. "Jessica, you don't understand. My salary, it's not what I let you believe it was." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the lifestyle I've been living, the one you've been admiring, it wasn't funded by my income." Marcus looked down at his hands, unable to meet her eyes. "Sarah has been paying for things I didn't even know she was paying for. The golf club membership, the car payments, the renovations, even the expensive dinners I've been taking you to. I thought my salary was covering our basic expenses, but it turns out Sarah was subsidizing our entire lifestyle." Jessica was very quiet now, her face growing pale as the implications began to sink in. "How much of your lifestyle was Sarah subsidizing?" "Most of it. Maybe all of it." Marcus's voice cracked. I don't even know anymore. I thought I was making good money, thought I was successful, but when I look at what things actually cost versus what I actually earn. Marcus. Jessica's voice was sharp. How much money do you make? $85,000 a year. Before taxes. Jessica stared at him. That's it? That's your total income? Yes. But Marcus, the restaurants you've taken me to, they cost more per meal than I spend on groceries in a month. Your golf club membership is more expensive than my car payment. The hotel rooms, the weekend trips, the gifts. Jessica was calculating rapidly, her expression growing more stricken with each passing moment. If you only make $85,000 a year, how were you affording any of this? I wasn't, Marcus whispered. Sarah was. The silence that followed was profound. Jessica sat back in her booth, staring at Marcus as if he'd transformed into a stranger before her eyes. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, she said finally. You've been having an affair with me, taking me to expensive places, buying me gifts, showing me a lifestyle that you can't actually afford, all while your wife was secretly paying for everything. Jessica, I didn't know. You didn't know that $400 dinners were beyond your budget? You didn't know that $500 hotel rooms were more than you could afford? You didn't question where the money was coming from? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because the truth was that on some level, he had known. He'd known that his lifestyle seemed more expensive than his salary should support, but he'd deliberately avoided looking too closely at the household finances. He'd been content to let Sarah handle the money management while he enjoyed the benefits. There's more, he said quietly. Jessica closed her eyes as if bracing for impact. More? Sarah isn't what I told you she was. She's not a struggling freelance designer barely scraping together grocery money. What is she? Marcus looked across the table at Jessica, this woman who had fallen in love with a successful man who didn't exist and delivered the final blow to both their delusions. She's a multimillionaire. Jessica's eyes snapped open. What? She owns a digital marketing company that generates over $1 million in revenue annually. She has investment portfolios worth millions of dollars. She owns multiple properties. Jessica, Sarah is worth more money than we'll probably ever see in our combined lifetimes. Jessica was completely still, her face cycling through disbelief, shock, and the dawning realization of what this meant. And you've been telling me that she's unsuccessful? That she doesn't contribute to your household? That she's not ambitious or financially responsible? Marcus nodded miserably. Marcus. Jessica's voice was deadly quiet. Are you telling me that I've spent the last year listening to you criticize your wife for not being successful enough, while she was actually more successful than both of us combined? Jessica, I didn't know. She hid it from me. She never told me about the money, about the business, about any of it. Jessica looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her reframing every conversation they'd had, every criticism he'd made of Sarah, every comparison that had made her feel superior to his supposedly inadequate wife. Oh my God, she whispered. I helped you plan to leave a millionaire for me. The full absurdity of the situation was settling over both of them. Marcus had been prepared for Jessica to be upset about the deception, but he hadn't anticipated the particular horror she was displaying as she realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. Jessica, I know this is a shock, but a shock? Jessica's voice was rising now, drawing attention from other diners. Marcus, do you understand what you've done? Do you understand what you're asking me to do? I'm asking you to be with me. I'm asking you to build a life with me based on who we actually are, not on money or status, or who we actually are. Jessica stood up abruptly. Who you actually are is a man who was living off his wife's fortune while cheating on her with me. Who you actually are is someone who convinced me that his wife was a failure while she was actually supporting your entire lifestyle. She grabbed her purse, her movements sharp with fury and humiliation. Jessica, please don't leave. We can work through this. Work through what, Marcus? Work through the fact that you've destroyed your marriage to one of the most successful women either of us will ever meet? Work through the fact that you're asking me to build a future on your $85,000 salary when I thought I was getting someone with real financial security? Jessica paused at the edge of their booth, looking down at Marcus with something that might have been pity. I fell in love with your success, Marcus. I fell in love with your ambition, your financial stability, your ability to provide the kind of lifestyle I wanted. But none of that was real. None of that was you. She shook her head. I'm not going to throw away my career, my independence, and my future to subsidize a man who was too stupid to recognize that he was already married to everything I thought I wanted. Jessica walked away, leaving Marcus alone in a restaurant he couldn't afford, contemplating the ruins of both his marriage and his affair. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, asset divisions, and the systematic dismantling of the life Marcus had thought he was living. Sarah handled the divorce proceedings with the same quiet efficiency she'd applied to building her business empire, while Marcus discovered just how completely he'd misunderstood his own circumstances. The house was sold to Sarah, who bought out the mortgage and became his landlord for the final month of his residency. The golf club membership was canceled. The luxury car was returned to the dealership when Marcus realized he couldn't afford the payments. The credit cards that had funded his expensive dinners with Jessica were canceled when he discovered they were connected to Sarah's accounts, not his own. Most devastating of all was the realization that his professional reputation, which he'd thought was built on his own merits, had actually been enhanced by his association with Sarah's success. The expensive clothes, the confidence that came from financial security, the social connections he'd made through their shared lifestyle, all of it had been built on a foundation that was crumbling beneath his feet. His colleagues at the pharmaceutical company began to notice changes. Marcus could no longer afford to join them for expensive business lunches. His wardrobe, no longer subsidized by Sarah's income, became noticeably less impressive. His golf game suffered when he had to give up the country club membership he'd thought his own success had earned. But the most profound change was in Marcus himself. The confidence that had made him attractive to Jessica, the assurance that had allowed him to criticize Sarah's contributions to their marriage, the sense of superiority that had justified his affair, all of it had been built on a lie about his own financial position. Without Sarah's hidden support, Marcus discovered that he was exactly what he'd accused his wife of being. Someone whose income barely covered basic expenses, whose career was stagnating, whose future was uncertain. The irony was not lost on him that he'd spent a year criticizing Sarah for making only $2,000 a month from her freelance work, while he now realized that without her secret contributions, his own disposable income was probably less than that. 3 months after Sarah filed for divorce, Marcus sat in a studio apartment across town, reviewing his monthly budget with the kind of careful attention he'd never needed to pay when his wife was managing their finances. His rent was $1,200 a month. His car payment, for the used Honda he'd been forced to buy when he returned the luxury vehicle, was $350. Insurance, utilities, groceries, gas. When he added it all up, his $85,000 salary left him with very little margin for error. He thought about Jessica, who had moved on with remarkable speed once she understood the true nature of his financial situation. Through mutual acquaintances, he'd heard that she was dating a senior executive at her company, someone with actual wealth and genuine success. Someone who could provide the lifestyle she wanted without requiring her to sacrifice her own ambitions. And he thought about Sarah, who had moved into a penthouse apartment in the most expensive building in the city and was expanding her business into new markets. According to the industry publications he now read obsessively, Apex Strategies had just landed 3 major clients and was being recognized as one of the region's fastest-growing digital marketing agencies. The woman he'd criticized for lacking ambition was being featured on the cover of Business Weekly as Entrepreneur of the Year. The woman he'd mocked for her little art projects was speaking at conferences about building successful creative agencies. The woman he'd compared unfavorably to his mistress was being interviewed about her investment strategies and her approach to building generational wealth. Marcus kept these articles in a folder on his desk, not out of pride, but out of a kind of horrified fascination with his own blindness. He'd been married to one of the most successful businesswomen in their city, and he'd never known it. Worse, he'd actively diminished and criticized her while living off her success. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Marcus received a letter from Sarah's attorney. It was brief, professional, and devastating in its clarity. Mrs. Chen has asked me to inform you that the Henderson Industries account, which you spent 6 months pursuing, has been permanently awarded to Apex Strategies. As you are now aware, Apex Strategies is Mrs. Chen's company. She wanted you to know that your presentations, while adequate, were ultimately unnecessary. She had already secured the contract through her existing business relationship with Henderson Industries' executive team. Mrs. Chen asked me to convey that she found your efforts amusing, but that in the future, she would appreciate it if you did not claim credit for securing accounts that her company had already won. Please direct any future communications through this office. Marcus read the letter 3 times before its full meaning sank in. The account he'd been so proud of pursuing, the presentation he'd been so confident would earn him a promotion, the success he'd been planning to build his future on. Sarah had already made it irrelevant months before he'd even started working on it. She'd been watching him prepare for a presentation to secure an account she'd already won. She'd been listening to him strategize about landing a client who was already paying her company millions of dollars in fees. She'd been married to a man who was trying to impress her with his professional capabilities while she was running the company that had already made his efforts pointless. For the first time since their marriage ended, Marcus laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the alternative was a kind of despair that felt too large to contain. He'd lost everything: his wife, his mistress, his financial security, his professional confidence, his comfortable lifestyle, because he'd been too arrogant to recognize that the woman he'd been dismissing was more successful than he could ever hope to be. And Sarah? Sarah was free. 6 months after her divorce was finalized, Sarah Chen stood in the conference room of her expanded offices, looking out at the city skyline, while her executive team discussed the quarterly revenue reports. Apex Strategies had grown by 300% since she'd stopped hiding her success, landing major clients who had been drawn to work with the woman featured on magazine covers and speaking at industry conferences. Her investment portfolio had grown to over $5 million. Her real estate holdings now included a commercial building that housed her company's headquarters. She'd been invited to serve on the boards of 2 major corporations and had started a scholarship fund for women entrepreneurs. But more than that, she was happy. For 8 years, she'd been testing whether Marcus could love her without her money, and she'd discovered that he couldn't. But in the process, she'd also discovered something more important. She could love herself with or without anyone else's approval. The test had revealed Marcus's true character, but it had also revealed her own. She was strong enough to build an empire in secret. She was smart enough to protect her assets while giving her marriage every possible chance to succeed. She was brave enough to walk away from a man who couldn't value her when he thought she had nothing to offer. And now, surrounded by a team of brilliant colleagues, living in a beautiful home she'd chosen for herself, running a company that bore her own vision and values, Sarah realized that Marcus had actually given her a gift. He'd shown her exactly what she was worth, not in dollars, but in dignity, integrity, and the quiet strength that had allowed her to build something extraordinary while everyone around her underestimated her capabilities. The phone on the conference table rang, interrupting her thoughts. Her assistant's voice came through the speaker. "Sarah, I have Jessica Martinez online too. She says it's urgent." Sarah looked at her executive team, who were watching her with curious expressions. After 6 months, the story of her divorce had become something of a legend in business circles. The millionaire entrepreneur who'd hidden her success to test her husband's character, only to discover he was cheating on her with a woman who made a fraction of her income. "I'll take it," Sarah said. Jessica's voice was strained, professional, but with an undertone of desperation. "Sarah, I know this is unusual, but I was hoping we could meet. There are some things I need to say to you, and I'd prefer to do it in person." Sarah considered this request. She'd heard through industry connections that Jessica's relationship with the senior executive hadn't worked out, and that she was struggling professionally after word of her affair with Marcus had spread through their business community. "What did you want to discuss, Jessica?" "I want to apologize, and I want to ask for your advice." The irony was rich. The woman who had been held up as the standard of female achievement that Sarah could never reach was now asking for guidance from the woman she'd helped betray. "My advice? About building a career, about financial independence, about how to become the kind of woman who doesn't need to depend on anyone else for security." Jessica's voice broke slightly. "Sarah, I made a terrible mistake. I got involved with Marcus because I thought he could give me the lifestyle I wanted. But watching what happened to both of us, seeing what you built on your own, I realized that I was approaching everything wrong." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city she'd conquered through her own intelligence and determination. "Jessica, I appreciate your call, but I'm not sure what you expect me to say. I expect you to tell me the truth about what it really takes to build the kind of success you have. About how to become financially independent without needing to find a man to provide it. About how to build something that belongs to me, not to someone else's perception of what I should be. Sarah looked around her conference room, at the financial reports showing another record-breaking quarter, at the team of talented people who worked for a company she'd built from nothing, at the view from the building she now owned. Jessica, the truth is that everything you thought you wanted from Marcus, you're capable of building yourself. But it requires you to stop looking for someone else to provide your security and start creating your own. I know that now, but I don't know how to start. I don't know how to transition from depending on other people to depending on myself. Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey from a woman hiding her success to prove a point, to a woman comfortable with displaying her achievements because they belonged to her. The first step, she said, is understanding that your value doesn't come from what other people think you're worth. It comes from what you're willing to build, what you're willing to risk, and what you're willing to sacrifice to create something that belongs entirely to you. She paused, looking at the framed photo on her desk, not of Marcus, which had been removed long ago, but of herself at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for her new headquarters. And Jessica, the second step is understanding that the only person who can give you the life you want is you. After she hung up the phone, Sarah returned to her meeting with a sense of completeness that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with the recognition that she'd become exactly who she was meant to be. Marcus had tested her by underestimating her, and she'd passed by proving that her worth had never been dependent on his recognition. Jessica had tested her by betraying her, and she'd passed by choosing forgiveness over bitterness. The business world had tested her by doubting that a woman could build an empire while pretending to be powerless, and she'd passed by creating something extraordinary. But most importantly, Sarah had tested herself, and she'd discovered that she was stronger, smarter, and more capable than even she had known. As her team resumed their discussion of expansion plans and new market opportunities, Sarah realized that the greatest victory wasn't that Marcus had lost everything when he underestimated her. The greatest victory was that she had gained everything when she finally stopped underestimating herself. And in the end, that made all the deception, all the pain, and all the testing worth it. Because Sarah Chen had learned the most important lesson of all, the only opinion of her worth that truly mattered was her own. Marcus might have called her worthless, but Sarah had proven to herself that she was priceless. And that knowledge belonged to her, built by her, and could never be taken away by anyone else's blindness or betrayal. The underestimated wife had become an unstoppable force, and the millionaire who had been hiding in plain sight had finally stepped into the light where she belonged. If this story touched your heart, if Sarah's journey from hidden success to open triumph resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had your worth underestimated by someone who should have known better? Have you ever discovered strength you didn't know you possessed? Let us know how Sarah's story of transformation and self-discovery inspired you, because sometimes the most powerful victories come not from proving others wrong, but from proving ourselves right.